So, if you have been following me on Facebook or following my husband Jeremy on Facebook, you're among our friends group, or you've just heard the story, etc. You would know the story of how God moved us in such an incredible, like God orchestrated things in such an incredible way that we literally started dating, shifted into courting, and then got married in less than 4 months. So between October 16 to February 15. We got married on February 15. Now, a lot of so Jeremy and I have spoken about shared her story, and one of the common things that I hear come up from persons is that they just need to start. The key thing they take from our story is that they just need to start believing in God again, and that what they're believing for is possible, etc., etc. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that thought process and that perspective. However, I do feel like there is more to it than that, because one of the questions we get asked a lot is, how is marriage? And I think persons are taken aback when I say, hey, there's a lot of adjusting to do, and marriage is fun, and marriage is work, right? And so I have said this to a couple persons, that the only reason why I am able to show up the way that I show up with my husband, and that my husband is able to show up with me, is because of how God prepared me for him. Persons hear me talk about, God gave me vision for my husband, and I believe the vision and all of that stuff. But there was also a lot of work in preparing for the vision God gave me. And so today, what I do want to talk about a little bit is what preparation for my husband looked like. What was that process that God put me through to grow me and mature me? I have said on a couple of occasions that if I had met if my husband and I if Jeremy and I had connected the way that we did 6 months, like we both said, if we had connected with each other the way we did in October, if we had connected that way 6 months before, or even a month before, we would have messed each other up, right? And so I don't want to encourage persons to get vision around their spouse and start believing God for their spouse without putting in the part too that it's not just about that. It's actually allowing God to mold you and prepare you for the thing that you are believing for. And so here's my story. So I've shared in previous videos that you've seen our wedding video, you've seen Jeremy and I talk about our story, and you've heard it from both my perspective and his perspective. But when God gave me a vision for my husband on December 15th of 2019, it basically went something along the lines of this. Like, I was there writing down my goals for 2020, and the Lord asked me, Shania, what about marriage? And I remember I laughed. I'm like, God, I don't know what you're talking about. I'm not into that, because I really wasn't that focused on marriage. He brought up the topic 2 more times, and it's on the second time I'm like, all right, God, I am willing to listen to you. And I remember he said to me, you will get married in 2020. And I laughed. I'm like, God, what do you mean? I am not dating anybody. I'm not in a relationship. I don't even have a man that's interested in me. Ain't no way that's gonna happen. And so even though I got the vision of the guy in terms of the characteristics, which by the way, Jeremy hit on every one of them, I found it hard to believe that God could make it happen in a year. And so the most I had faith for was to say that, God will prepare me for marriage in 2020. And boy, did I get prepared. I, through connections, so if you had read In Search of the Pink Flamingo, you would know the story about the guy who I was deeply connected with, who we became deeply connected with shortly after, like, I think probably like that February of that year, and me praying to the Lord, like, God, should I even be entertaining this person? And I remember the Lord gave me a couple pieces of instructions. He said to slow down because we have some maturing to do. He said that we are a fit. And right now I don't remember what the other thing was, but I talk about it in Search of the Pink Flamingo. Now the thing is, we did not slow down. We went on the roller coaster thing and everything, and it became quite a mess. And the thing I love about God, I didn't love it about him in during that situation, is that I wouldn't slow down. And when things started to get really crazy, I wanted to opt out of the situation, right? So we ignore God, we disobey, and then when things started to get really weird, I wanted to opt out. And the Lord said to me, nope, I'm not going to let you all opt out. There's something that I'm teaching you now. Like, we're going to use the situation for your good. And, well, and at the time I still couldn't see it. But I went through this whole process with this guy of, at the time I didn't know that I battled with deep feelings of rejection and deep feelings of being abandoned and not being able to express myself on an emotional level, not being able to communicate properly, all that stuff. Because I thought that because I was doing well in corporate and doing well in my career, that I would do well in a relational space, and that was not the case, right? So basically we went through a season where he triggered me left, right, and center, and I triggered him left, right, and center. And it was during that season that the Lord started to show me myself, right? And so I started that journey of, Lord, help me to do better with this man. Lord, help me to do this better. Lord, and just that back and forth struggle of, healing and growing and maturing. And the sad thing about it is that while I was healing and growing and maturing a bit with this guy, he, on the other hand, was stuck in the way. And while I was healing and growing, there was still this emotional part of me that felt like this was it. And so, even though God had said, commit, you have to stay here, there was all of this emotional stuff that needed to be dealt with that I hadn't touched on, that had been gathering up for years that I hadn't touched on. And so I went through a season of God like teaching me who I am in him, right? And when I started to see myself, I remember my prayers for this young man started to shift, right? And no longer was I just praying about, Lord, our relationship. I know the thing I was praying about was not the thing that was matching up with how I was behaving with him, right? Because I was still like had that emotional, we still had that whole emotional connection thing going on. I started to realize that, there's something bigger here with him, right? And it wasn't a matter of that he had to be my boyfriend or whatever, because we were in a situationship, or that we had to have some romantic connection there. It was a matter now of, maybe there's a bigger reason why God connected us, and so forth. But even in that, I kept lying to myself, because we would have the conversations around, we're nothing more than friends. And yet on the emotional side of things, we were anything but friends, right? And so we went down that road of lying to ourselves and lying to each other and keep on keeping things going on, while the emotional hole that was there just kept us into these cycles that the Lord was slowly healing me from. Um, I think we went through that until probably about 2023. We even got to the point where we'd separate for a bit and then we come back under the same thing again and do it again and again and again. And I remember in 2023, we had a conversation, like, and it turned into this whole big thing. And note, after years of, my friends would tell me, Chanel, you're better than that, and all of that stuff. And I would be like, yep, I know on a logical level, but emotionally there's some things going on. And now it's not even about me and what I want. It's about being obedient to God and staying. And me even getting angry at God because I'm like, God, why do I have to be here while still being disobedient when he tells me to stop, to stop doing a particular thing or to approach the situation in a particular way, etc. Right? I remember in 2023, we had a huge falling out. And I remember as I sat and read how this man saw me and how he opted to communicate with me. See, hands coming up right here. As I sat and realized, like, it hit me how he opted to communicate with me, I thought to myself, this cannot be somebody who says that they love me and somebody who says that they respect me and somebody who says that I am your best friend. And so I opted to walk away. There's a certainty within me like, yep, now is the time to do it. And I remember when I walked away, he was very angry. He was very, very angry about it. But there was this calm within me. And it wasn't because I did not care about him. It was just that I now saw myself through fresh eyes. And I stress on this because when I talk about the people-pleasing stages that persons tend to go through, one of the first steps that you will actually go through as a recovering people-pleaser is the stage around identity recovery, how you see yourself. And because I was starting to see myself as God's daughter and accept myself as God's daughter and actively starting to obey God around things relating to my identity, I got to the stage where I realized I can no longer accept certain things from some individuals. And yes, God's version of fairness will look different from the world's version of fairness. And that's why I was so grateful that by the time I walked away from this young man, it wasn't from like a place of resentment or, I deserve better or I'ma show you and da. It wasn't any of that. It was from a place of acceptance. We have come to the end of the road here, and that is okay. I wish you the best, and I pray and hope that you wish me the best too, right? Now, shortly after we parted ways, the Lord switched me into the second stage of my people-pleasing recovery journey at a high level, emotional recovery. You see, I mentioned before that I didn't know how to communicate, I didn't know how to relate to people relationally, etc. And a part of that included me struggling on an emotional level. Like, if my emotions came up and bat me in my face, I would not know. Like, at the time. And not only that, I struggled to identify my feelings. I struggled to accept that they were my feelings. And I struggled to do anything relating to my feelings, my emotions. And because of that, I spent a lot of times lying to myself and lying to others and pretending that things were okay when things were not, and then being deeply resentful and deeply angry and all of that stuff, just making myself sick internally and just holding on to all of these things. I avoided conflict and all of that. And so that showed up in a relational space with me, especially with this young man. And I remember shortly after we broke up, the Lord connected me with another friend of mine. And we started to get into that space too. And it was the emotional side of things that really, really, really started to screw me over. And when that emotional side of things really started to screw me over, by the way, emotional recovery is what my second book, Lean Into Your Pink Flamingo, is about. The first book, In Search of the Pink Flamingo, is about the identity recovery set of things. But when this person came up, who was sort of like he represented so much of the vision that God gave me. The only thing about him is that he was not a Christian. And for me, at the time, so I spent a year back and forth around this second guy, right? And it was back and forth from an emotional standpoint, to the point where it got to the stage where by the September of 2023, the Lord said to me, the Lord showed me that, Shanielle, from an identity perspective, you're being your pink flamingo self. Like, you're showing up. But the thing that is holding you back is your emotional immaturity. Right? And so some of us talk about, a lot of times we talk about how, the man has to be this or the woman has to be this, when we never take a look at ourselves and recognize the part that we play in either making the relationship strong or breaking it down, right? And so the Lord showed me that, my emotional immaturity and the things that from my past that I had not dealt with on an emotional level was actually holding me back from the relationship that I wanted. And I remember getting so upset to the point where I was like, Lord, what should I do? And I remember he said to me, it is time for you to go to therapy to learn how to deal with your emotions. He sent me my therapist and everything. My therapist is amazing. I remember my therapist and I started off with 5 sessions. And it was one of the hardest things that I ever did. And it was one of the most necessary things that I ever did, because I did not recognize how many feelings I had from things on my past and how they were showing up in my present day, right? So I started getting things on an emotional level down, and I was like, God, this is it. Note, by this time, we're in 2024. Remember, God gave me the promise in December of 2019. And so, over that time, especially as I went through things with the first guy, I started to lose faith. I started to believe it wasn't possible. There are times when I stopped dreaming about it, and even thinking about it, and then the Lord would remind me of it. And I got to the point where I added it to my calendar for like the 15th of every month. I'd get the alert to say, hey, remember God's promise to you. But I was looking on now at 2024, and I'm like, Lord, I can't keep believing. Like, I'm believing for this thing, and I don't see any evidence of where it's going to come. I've been in 2 situationships since, and though I have learned, or I'm still learning the lessons that you intended for me to learn from them, I'm still nowhere close to what you promised me. And I remember 2024 came in, and a friend and I were having a conversation, and I said to her out of nowhere, I believe that I'm going to meet a guy, fall in love, get engaged, and get married in a year, or this year. And I didn't realize it until after Jeremy and I were married, that I finally believed for the thing God told me in 2019. Remember 2019, God said to me, you'd get married in 2020. He was literally telling me you'd get married in a year. and I couldn't believe for it. So I believed 2024 was when I believed. I'm like, yep. And I'm telling people about it. Like, it would come up in conversations and I would mention it and people would call me crazy and everything and all of that stuff. And while that is happening, because remember, this video is not about my testimony, it's about God preparing me for Jeremy. I remember one of the things that really, really hit me is I got to March of 2024. I'm telling persons about this. I don't see any evidence of how this thing is going to happen. I have situations where I meet guys in like random places. Like, for example, I met this guy in a airport, right? The Lord led me to stay overnight in Miami International Airport, and it turned out I met this guy like 2 a.m. in the morning. He had come in late on a flight. He's from Germany or something. And we literally had such a good conversation where it was sure he was interested in me, etc. And I did not chase him. And so March came in, and I remember I went to a resort with my sister for vacation, just to spend some time with her and, to unwind and relax, etc. And while we were at that resort, we stayed in the couples section. And I remember one day, as I am sitting on the beach, I got angry with God. And I was like, Lord, I am believing for this thing. You have healed me in so many ways, and I feel like I am really prepared for my husband. God, you have told me, that he told me to write down deeper things about what I was believing for my husband. I think September of 2023, beyond the initial vision that he gave me. I wrote that down. He told me, you need to read that and remind yourself of that like a couple times for the week. I did that right up until like December 2023, to the point where I was telling friends, if I met my husband, I would know him because I know how he felt. And I was just like, March 2024, God, I am doing all of that. I'm being obedient to you, and I'm nowhere closer to the thing that you promised me. And I remember he led me to, I think it was Exodus. And Exodus was talking about the children of Israel who God was leading, but they, because of their own will and their own way, they ended up with consequences that God never intended for them to have in the first place if they had yielded to God's will. And then after experiencing those consequences, they had the audacity to be moaning and complaining and being extremely bitter about the things that was a result of their actions. And as I'm reading it, something pricked in me, because the Lord showed me, like, I started to reflect back on the years before, and I acknowledge, Lord, I am here today not because of anything that you have done, but because I stepped outside of your will and your way when you told me to do a thing a particular way. And I should not be moaning and complaining and being bitter about that or how things are happening. I should actually be pretty thankful that you have turned this for my good. I have grown from it, and I can see the improvement within me. And I remember, as my heart shifted to a place of gratefulness, I heard the Lord say to me, Shania, look at the birds. By that time, he has gone into the thing about teaching me a lot through the birds. And I remember he showed me, it was a windy day that day. And as I looked at the birds, I realized that they were, oh, bless me. I realized that instead of flapping hard against the wind, the birds were choosing to float with the wind currents. And I remember the Lord said to me, and I don't remember the exact words, so I'm going to be paraphrasing here. But he said the birds, it's almost like he was saying there's a time and a season for flapping. And if you flap in a season when you're supposed to just ride the wind, you're going to be doing a lot more work than if you had just ridden the wind. And I remember as I listened to him, he continued to say to me, Shanielle, I have been sending you guys, eligible guys, since I made a promise to you. I have, and you have ignored my instructions. And when it's no longer about instructions, you got to the point where you are now using the vision I gave you as a checkbox, red flag balancer for anybody who has something that you see is your version of it. You don't want it, you don't entertain them. You're now using the vision I gave you and the vision I told you to write down deeper as a protective mechanism. And I remember I said to him, Lord, what do you mean by that? And he showed me that there was a guy from like 2020 that came into my space, and this was somebody who was interested in me. He asked me a couple of times. I turned him down. And then I think probably in like 2023, I think he got married, if I remember correctly. And I remember we were having the conversations around it, and I remember he said to me, you know, if you had given me the time of day when I was interested in you, I would have married you. I was deeply interested in you because I love the way that you move. Then he reminded me of the guy from 2023, and he said to me, it's because of your emotional immaturity around that you were unable to make space for this person. And then he pointed out to me the guy at the airport. It was just like he just showed me. And I remember feeling so repentant around it. And the Lord said to me, Shaniel, it is time for you to be honest with yourself that you are looking for love, or that you desire love, but you're afraid to love again. And let me tell you, that was like a gut punch for me. Because how can you be believing for the thing that God has for you, and yet your very actions on a belief level, on an emotional level, is literally working against you? And I remember I said to the Lord, you know, Lord, show me what to do around this, because I honestly don't know, right? I was grieved about it. And I think the Lord started to work in my heart. A couple months later, I went through the stage of disconnecting with the guy from September from 2023, like formally disconnecting. And even though that was hard in its own way, it took me a couple months to recover. On an emotional level, I knew that we needed to end where we needed to end, right? Because I wasn't interested. Even though he was close to the vision God gave me, he was not it. And he was not interested in doing anything around it. And so me continuing to pursue on a heart level, on a emotional level, was just a waste of both our times. It did not honor him, it did not honor me. It definitely did not honor God. And I remember after, it was less than a week after doing that, I sat down with the Lord, and I remember I started to see all of these instances of couples and note the characteristics that the husbands had with the wives and how the couples interacted together and everything. And I felt the Lord telling me that, you know, he's going to give me that. And I started to believe on a different level again. I remember August of 2024, the Lord said to me, Shaniel, it is time you rip up the list. And the list that he was referring to was the list he had told me to create in September of 2023 that I had expounded like deep out. He said to me, "It's time to rip up that list because you have turned that list. I keep saying risk. You have made that list an idol." And I remember I handed it over to the Lord. I submitted it to Him. I released it. I stopped looking at it. I just let it go. All of this time, I am still believing that, the Lord's gonna it's gonna happen. I remember I had a friend who told me, if that happened for you, I'm returning to Jesus. She has returned to Jesus, right? But fast forward to September of 20. Oh, let's talk about August of 2024. So all the same time the Lord is showing me all these things, I remember I went on a cruise with my friends, and they had a whole thing around a campaign around diamonds going on. And I remember I went to this workshop, and I remember when I went to this workshop, I learned about the Tanzanite diamond for the first time. And the story of it moved me so deeply, because it's basically, the story basically says that, the Tanzanite diamond is one of the last diamonds to be discovered in the world. It was discovered in the Kilimanjaro mountains by experts who, when they came upon it, like kids were just playing with it like it was nothing. And the thing that really hit me in that moment was that it's not that the diamond wasn't valuable. It's just that the valuable thing in the wrong hands can be deemed worthless. And but the valuable thing in the right hands can be deemed, the value can be seen. And I remember being so moved by that story. I recognized that, that this is my stone. I'm not a jewelry girl, but this is my stone. And I remember exclaiming out in that workshop, "Oh my God, I found my stone!" Right? But I was so convinced that it was my stone that I even went to the jewelry area to go look at it to see, if any of these things were in my range, my budget range. And I remember turning to my friend at the time and saying, don't worry about it. My husband is going to get it for me. I was deeply convinced that my husband was coming 2024. And I remember my friend saying, why do you know what you're talking about? You're not even dating nobody. And I remember I said to her, don't worry about it. Do not worry about it. He is coming soon, because the next part of the story is that there were only 3 Tanzanite diamond mines in the world. One had closed down, and so there was only 2. And so I'm like, he has to come here before the next 2 close down. So there was that belief and everything. September of 2024, I remember probably about middle of September 2024, I feel like this was like one of the final pieces that God, around preparation, that I want to talk to you about, because this is something that a lot of us as people who are believing for marriage and a partner find it so hard to do. But I remember September of 2024, the Lord, I got up one Saturday morning, and I said, "Lord, what do you want me to do today?" And He said to me, "Come sit with me." Note, I had a long list of things to do that day. But I thought about it, and I'm like, all right, cool. That day turned out to be one of the most blessed days of my entire life. Tell you, joyful peace, that just is in the Lord's presence. But one of the things that the Lord said to me that day, He said to me, "September is your last month single." And I remember I wrote it down, because I'm like, I know I did not say that to myself. God, I'm gonna see you work this out. Still not dating anybody. Right? Still not dating anybody at that time. Towards the end of September, no, there are 2 movies that the Lord tend to send me back during that season to go rewatch, and every time I rewatch it, I learn something new about how a man should relate to his wife. And it teaches me, the Lord used it to teach me something new about marriage. The two movies are I Still Believe, the story of Jeremy Camp and Melissa Camp, and Redeeming Love. I think it's a movie adaptation based on a book by Francine Rivers. I've never read the book, but it's a story that's loosely based around the biblical story of Hosea and Gomer. And I remember the Lord had told me to rewatch those two movies in that season. And as I'm watching Redeeming Love, there's this scene in there, so this is a spoiler, where Michael Hosea, who is the male lead in there, is in a church, and he's thanking God for his blessing, the things that the Lord has blessed him with, etc. And then he gets up to leave. And as he gets up to leave, he stops. He starts walking away, and he stops. And when he stops, he turns around and he comes back and he says, Lord, I'm really thankful for your blessing. Basically, me paraphrasing, I'm thankful for your blessings, Lord. But it would be really nice to have somebody to share it with. And then he goes on, and it would be nice if she has, long legs, or like fishing. And he stops himself and he says, Lord, you know what I need. You know what I desire. I trust you. And there's seasons in my life when I'm watching something and it hits me on a different level. And I recognize when I'm watching certain movies and I'm like, I get stuck on a point, the Holy Spirit wants to show me something. And so as I'm watching it, it hit me that I have believed for this thing for, I don't even know how many years, since 2019, the end of 2019. I couldn't believe for it fully. I went through this thing of couldn't believing for it fully. I went through this part of starting to believe for it, but still being disobedient around the work and the healing that the Lord wanted me to do to prepare me for my husband. I went through trying to make it happen on my own, and the one thing I had never done was submit that vision that God gave me, my desires that vision birthed, the desires that vision birthed within me, back to God. I never submitted it back to God. I never submitted the how it could happen to God. In fact, I was like, you know what? If God promised it, I can make it happen. And that day was the first day when that realization hit me. There was a spirit, like, I felt so repentant. And I remember I repented and I said, I repented of it. And I said, Lord, I use the words of Michael Hosea. I said, Lord, you know what I need. Because the truth is, I don't. I said, Lord, you know what I need. You know what I desire. I trust you. And I let it go. And I want to do this as an aside. A lot of times we think we know what we need. Yep, we think we know what we need. And the truth of the matter is we don't. There's been so many times I've spent so long working towards the thing that I think I need. And when I get it, I'm like, I'm no happier than I was without it. Or I get excited about it for a couple of days and then it is, that's it. It doesn't give me the joy and the peace that I thought it would give me. And I have learned that when I do things God's way, when the thing comes to me, one, I am ready to steward it way better than if I had gone my own way. I don't have to work as hard to get it as if I'd gone down the road of my way. And 2, 3, there's a peace and a joy that comes with it that I cannot explain, right? And I say all of that to say that when I submitted it to God, By October 15th, I remember the Lord said to me, and at the time I didn't even put it like connected. I'm reviewing my journal and I realized I'd written down, I made a note of it. I was watching a movie October 15th of 2024, and the Lord said to me, get up and go for a walk. And of course, I have to be a little bit stubborn. I have to complain a little bit something. And I remember eventually I'm like, all right, God, it's late, but all right, cool. You tell me to go for a walk, let me go for a walk. And I went for the walk, sorry. And I remember he said to me, things change tomorrow. And I remember when he said it, I was just like, well, I'm thinking, God, there are a lot of things I'm believing you for. My relationship status did not cross my mind any at all. But that was the thing that he was talking about. When I tell you, Jeremy is like a on switch flipping me where Jeremy was concerned. I've known him for like 2 years. Apparently the on switch flipped in him a couple weeks before, and it didn't connect for me. And once an on switch flipped, the things that we were talking about, how we talked about them, how God was confirming things between both of us, like talking to both of us at the same time about the same things, all of that stuff, you could just see God's hand throughout it. And the thing that really connects with me was recognizing that the way I showed up with Jeremy, the thing that attracted him to me, like made him like, oh my God, yep, Lord, I know you're saying yes to about her, and I'm fully on board, are a lot of the qualities that the Lord groomed in me throughout my season of preparation, right? And the same thing when we talk about it, it's the same thing for him. A lot of the things that I admire and that I love about him, God groomed that in him during his season of preparation. And so I'm gonna stop here, because if you want to know the rest of our story and how it goes, you can just go watch the video with Jeremy and I talking about our story. Or if you want to see our wedding, you can just go watch the video around our wedding. But the thing I want to leave with you is those are the same qualities that the Lord continue to mature and grow within us. Those are the same qualities and support that allows me to be an effective helpmate to Jeremy. And note, I thought I knew what that means, and I'm now learning what that means because the Holy Spirit is teaching me. Those are the things. And so my encouragement to you is, if you are gonna have vision for your spouse, the one thing you need to be praying for is that the Lord is teaching you how to steward what you're praying for, or what He has for you. Because if you get the thing that you're praying for and you are not ready to manage it or to steward it, it is going to destroy you, and it is going to destroy the other person. I want to also say one other thing, and then I'll close off after this. I remember something that flipped for me in 2024 was at the beginning of 2024, and I think if I ever do, I won't even go into that, but the beginning of 2024, the Lord flipped how I saw His sons. And there are two prayers I started to pray out of that, because I remember the Lord said to me, Shaniel, you know I love you, right? And I'm like, yeah, I know. Whenever God asks me those questions, it's never just a face value question, like, what is He coming with? And I remember He said, they are my sons too. And the same way you are my daughter and I love you is the same way they are my sons and I love them. In fact, my word literally says I have no favorites. And I remember that hit me differently, because I mean, I grew up hearing about men as men this and men that and da 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 da. And here it was that God was saying to me very firmly that He loves me and He loves them. And I remember that changed, that flipped something so deeply inside of me, because I realized it was no longer just about honoring what I want and what I need and honoring me in a relationship. It was, how was I honoring God's Son? It was, these are men that God gives us to steward, whether they're our brother, whether we're in a relationship with them, whether they're our husbands, etc., etc. It just changed something for me. And out of that, two prayers came out for me. I started to pray, Lord, teach me how to love how He needs to be loved, not how I think He needs to be loved. Because that's another thing. We think about love your neighbor as yourself, as love them the way that we want to love, the way we think they need to be loved. And the truth of the matter is, everybody have different love languages. Everybody have different needs. And God is the only one who knows what we need. I talked about it before, that a lot of times I think I know what I need. I don't. Right? And so that's one of the blessed things that I've experienced with Jeremy. He literally prays for me, and he allows the Lord to show him what I need. Right? The second part that I started to pray was, Lord, teach me to see Him the way You see Him. Not through my blurred perspective, not through the things of a checklist that I am trying to check off, not how He says He is, but teach me to see Him the way that You see Him, and teach me to interact with Him the way I need to be interacting with Him. Right? There are other stories around this that I would love to tell you one day, but I've already been talking for like 40 odd minutes and thing. So I just want to wrap off here. That is not just about getting the thing. Don't pray to just get the thing, but pray that the Lord teach you how to steward the thing. Because the truth of the matter is, people are also God's resources to us. I'm not just here to love on my husband and have good sex and just do life together and have a friend, etc. I am here to help my spiritual mentor says, relationship is about sanctification, right? And God uses me to sanctify my husband, to bring him closer to the version of this, like to show him the things that God want to work within him, and help him to work through those stuff. And he does the same with him as it relates to me, right? I've become a better person because of my interactions with my husband, and the fact that he tries as best as possible to be guided by the Holy Spirit, right? And so my encouragement to you today is that you think beyond just the love and just the vision and just the desires, but recognize that marriage is stewardship, and that there is somebody's life and somebody's future and somebody's the best version of themselves, or as I call it, the pink flamingo version of themselves, the person who God created them to be. That your union is meant to bring forth that in you and in that person. And so if you're not ready to steward that, or if you're not submitted to God around learning how to do that, then you and the person are both going to be in a deficit. And so that's my encouragement to you, that it's not just about the dream and the desire and but allow God to do the work in you that actually prepares you to be a good manager, to be a good steward, right, of the one who He has for you. I pray that God bless you. I pray that He keeps you, and I pray that He gives you, He teaches you how to be a good manager as He prepares you for the one He has for you.